Hello, 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 and welcome back to my YouTube channel. All you hungry learners out there. Learners. So glad to have you back around these parts. Today's another week, another episode, another opportunity to kind of talk about some code. Always have to be careful about that because there's code and there's tech. But tech also includes like hardware, like iPhones. Speaking of which, I'm getting the new iPhone. I am very, very excited. Expect some more higher definition, vloggy-like videos with my better iPhone camera. It's gonna be great. Today, I don't wanna have a big preamble because I'm a little afraid of this video. Today, we're going to be delving deep on Async React Hooks. Say that 5 times fast and you will hopefully do better than me. I'm going to be building a little mini Jiffy search app from the ground up with no code pre-made. So I am terrified. Beware, probably some fancy editing ahead to make sure that the continuity of this video makes sense to both you and me. So the goal of this video is just mostly we're going to make an app where you can type in some input, hit search, and then see a whole bunch of Giphy, GIF search results. GIF, GIF, peanut butter, it's all the same to me. And we're going to then, through this exercise, also play with how to make async React hooks. And I'm curious how far I get, because this video, if it's longer than 20 minutes, then I wouldn't watch it, so then I wouldn't expect you to watch it, but maybe you will watch it. But through a live example, hopefully we'll together make and understand how best to write asynchronous React hooks. Let's get into the code. Okay, and here's where we begin with a lovely blank page. Woof. Okay, where do you want to start? Let's start making the search box and having us being able to submit our queries for searching Giphy. So to do that, we're going to make everyone's favorite form component. We're going to have an input component in here as well. We're going to have there be a value of search, which we're going to make in a second. On change, I'm going to come back to for now. Placeholder, we'll call this search for GIFs. And that's about it. Let's then have this on change be using, so on change is given an event, and we want to take from that event and pass it to this thing we'll call set search. We'll do current.target. Nope, just current.target. And what that will do is take from the element, the value, which is the search query, and update the search query. We're going to use everyone's favorite OG hook. There can be any hook that is a original gangster hook. It's going to be useState. We're going to call const search set search, and we're going to do useState. And by default, it's going to be an empty string, and we'll save that. We'll format it, and here we have it. Search for gifs. I type, and I did things wrong. I think I got current target and target. It's just target target.value, and now we have this successfully updating with my text. That shows you for trying to listen to me to learn these things. And then, of course, what we want to do is we're going to have a little button. We're going to have type submit, so that this, and then we'll have this say search, and then we'll have on here a on submit, and this will have our on submit function, which we'll define up here, function on submit. Taking the event object, by default, we want to prevent the default behavior, prevent default, because the default form behavior is to refresh the entire page, which we don't want. We want this to be a jazzy single page app. Then we're just going to log out the search value. So let's save that, refresh. We're going to tappa, hit searcha, we get tappa. So every time we do that, we get a new thing. Hit enter, all the things there, good. So we have now built a lovely, simple form in React with the useState React hooks. All the words together hopefully make sense. Let's keep going. I'm a little scared. Okay, so now what we want to do is start making API calls when we submit and make this search request. So the easy way to do that is obviously with fetch, but the API that we'll be playing with today is the Jiffy API. And Jiffy, in case you are not aware, is a fun little website that lets you search for GIFs. They have an API for developers. To use it, you have to make an app, which I already have done. Where's my dashboard? Right there. There's my API key. You are welcome to steal it because after I finish making this video, I'm going to delete it so that it's not abused and Jiffy gets mad at me. But I figured it'd be easier just to delete it later than having to try to hide the API key now. Let's actually make this a little bit bigger while we're playing around here. So that's the Sirens of Manhattan outside. Always fun. Luckily, I'm not coding outside, or you wouldn't be able to hear me at all. And one of my favorite ways of learning new things, and especially with an API, is by example. So here we have an API Explorer where it has a nice little GUI for actually making requests. So I'm using this API key. Again, it'll be deleted, so you're welcome to play with it because it won't work. I'm going to use the search endpoint, and we're going to search for cookie by default. I'm going to say I only want 10. Rating, yes, I want G. I don't want to show any things and have YouTube ban me. And then we're going to send a request. And we get the response back. This lovely, huge JSON blob. This is the top thing. Shucks, I hit the wrong. That's the GIF. That's going to be fun to play with. Let's go back here. Search is the query. And then cookie. And then this is 10. This is the URL. Send the request again. And when I was playing with this before, I was trying to understand how I could preview the image, and I did some ahead of time thinking just to save us time. Essentially, we're going to take from the images the preview item, and that's what we're going to use to actually render the video. But this is the actual API request right here. So I'm going to copy and paste this. Let's make this smaller again, shrink our linka. We'll save it in case we need to go back to it. And here what we're going to do, we're going to say whenever we submit the search query, we're going to say this in another state variable. And we're going to do this for demonstration purposes mostly. Many different ways you could do this, but for now we're focusing on Async React Hooks. So this is what we're going to use for demonstrating this. We're going to call this query. We're going to call this set query. And then we're going to go into here and then save the search query when we submit the form. So like, for example, if you want to make a starter use effect hook to start things off to see things working correctly, let's import use effect with a comma, because commas make the world go round. We're going to call this console log this, and we're going to log the query variable. A fun little hack, actually, a little developer pro tip. If you want to easily have a label for a variable that you're logging, you can expand it as an object using the ES 2015 plus object shorthand notation syntax. So when this gets logged, you'll see in a second what it looks like. I'm going to delete this console log, so all we have is one console. So what this should do when I save the page is we can type in the search value, and then when we actually hit enter or hit submit, it's going to call the onSubmit handler, which let's maybe just inline this because I'm a huge fan of inlining things. We're going to call this E, just like that. Now we can get rid of that. So when we hit onSubmit, we're going to prevent default so it doesn't do a page navigation. And then we're going to call setQuery to save the search in the new query object, which we're going to be console logging here. If you see my other videos about use effect, you'll know that this version is having no dependencies defined, so this should be logged every time this component re-renders. So I'm going to save the file, page reloads, and here I have by default an empty query. As I type in here, oops, that is running every time. Right, yes, that is correct. It's running every time because we have no dependencies in the use effect dependency argument. So I typed in cookie, hit enter, now it says cookie, but now it's going to spam cookie. So we don't want that. You could start off by having an empty array, right? That'll have it load once, but that's not going to help us either, because when we have an empty array as the dependency, it's going to only going to render this effect when the component first renders. And here we can actually even say that we have an ESLint rule that says that we're missing a dependency query. So what we're going to say is in here, whenever the query variable changes, then run this effect. Essentially, we're saying when the query state changes, I want to run this effect with the component. So I'm going to save that. Refreshes. I can type to my heart's content. Only when I hit enter, do things change. So this is nice. I don't have to worry about spamming the API call. Things are nice and controlled, which is lovely. I'm only running it once. So now what we want to do is that when this effect runs, when this query is updated, we want to actually call the API to actually get that data. So I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to go up to the very tippy top and grab this request URL right here. I'm going to copy and paste it. I'm just going to make a little helper function for myself because this function is very long. No, I won't. I'm just going to do it all in mine. So here we have this use effect. It's only being ran when the query state changes. So let's do the naive implementation of how you'd make an async React hook. This is the wrong way, and we'll see why in a second. So we're going to use this to be async because we want this function to be async. We want to say try catch for async await. We're going to say response equals fetch here with this huge long string, and because I have my font increased, it shows way off the page. We're using the query variable here, so we're going to replace this query of cookie with query right there. So we get this response value back. And then what we want to do, we don't really care about the error, is let's delete this console log. We have this response. We also want to do, we're going to parse the response object to a JSON. So I'm going to say, I'm going to call this let response, and we're going to call this, and then we'll do a const response, and we're going to call const JSON equals response.json, which again, we have to await this because these are asynchronous functions. And then we have this JSON object, so we'll just log that for now. Again, we'll use this fun little trick. So now I'm going to save this, and by default, we have an error from the built-in lint. Well, this is actually built into React, and it's effectively saying an effect function must not return anything besides a function, which is used for cleanup. However, it looks like you used an async function, which returns a promise by default. An async function returns a promise. You should not do that. Instead, write that async function inside the use effect and then call it immediately like this. And the reason for that is because React worries that if you were to write effects this way, it could lead to race conditions and mismanagement of state and UI in your application if things get rapidly called. Effects should be synchronous, and this is kind of how you work around that limitation. So for now, what we're going to do is I'm going to wrap this entire, so you can see here, async fetch data. I'm just going to do exactly what they tell me to do. And I'm going to say async function fetch data. And I'm just going to take all this content inside of it, put it inside here, remove this async value, and then immediately call fetch data. And then also what I realized is that this is running on page load, which I don't really need it to because this doesn't give me anything. So I'm going to say query if query doesn't equal an empty string, then we'll call fetch data. So let's save that. Cool. So no errors so far. If I search for cookie, look at that. No errors from React itself. And we have back here this JSON object, which has a data property. And this data property has all the results from here. And what I actually want is, I'm actually going to take this and save this into another state variable. So let's actually go into here and call this results, set results equals use state. And this is going to be an empty array by default. And we want to take this set results. I'm going to say set results. And we want this to equal JSON.data. And then what we actually want to do, this data is an array, but all I really want was that in images, there is this preview object that I want. So actually I'm going to take this data, which is an array, I'm going to map it to have each item. And each item is this big object. This is the object. I'm going to say return item.images. Then all I want is the preview. And then all I want is the MP4. So what this will be set to when I call results is just an array of those strings to the MP4 values. So if I save that, cool. Let's start rendering this just to see if this works. We're gonna go over here. Here's my form. Let's make a little break line because I love my old-fashioned BR. And we're just gonna have this be mapping over the results. We're gonna map over, I'm gonna call this item. And for now, all I wanna do is just render each of these in an H3. So let's do item is all that I have. And then I need a key as well, obviously. We'll save that. So now if I search for cookie, okay, things are showing up. Things are looking correct. But this is working, right? This is all looking good. I don't need to log this JSON anymore. That's fine. And I have in here, let's finish off the results of the UI, because I always love me some UI. I'm going to use the video element, which I don't use nearly enough. It's a self-closing component. The source is the item, and there's two other attributes that I'm going to do that makes things look nice and fun, is autoplay and a loop. Okay, so let's save that and search for cookie. Oh my god, we have some cookies in our console, our website. We are now making an asynchronous call whenever this changes. So like this is still there. I can call this banana. Look at that. Potassium intensifies. I feel my potassium intensifying already. To review, we have in here a input element, which is keeping track of its own state with search. And then when you actually submit the form around here, either by hitting enter or hitting the search button, we call the onSubmit handler, which is then setting that search query, that search value to the query value. And then we have our asynchronous use effect function, such that whenever the query state value changes, it'll call this effect. And all this effect actually does is right here. It's just calling another function. And this is where we do things asynchronous, which is awesome. This is mostly what we need to be aware of, is that when you want to run an asynchronous function, there's two things you have to be aware of. One, the effect itself cannot be asynchronous. React doesn't like that. It can cause issues. This is really distracting. Let me refresh the page. React doesn't like that. It can cause your UI to get out of sync with your data management, race conditions. The other thing is when you need to have an asynchronous function is to inline that asynchronous function inside, especially if you're using the wonderful React Hooks ESLint plugins. That's what, so for example, if I go back here and do an empty array, that is what has this warning right here. This React Hooks exhaustive depths is a rule, rules of hook, right here. ESLint plugin React Hooks. If you are using React Hooks, definitely recommend you install this plugin because it's kind of like having a tutor for how to learn and use hooks correctly. But by having the asynchronous function in line, it allows this ESLint plugin to work. We very much could have taken all this, yanked it out, moved it to the top here, and then passed in the query variable right there, right like this, and then just returned this value. So let's do this right here, a little fun refactor. Returning this, then we're going to call set results, remove that, and then call this fetch data dot then results. I'm just going to pass in set results because I think that's going to work fine. This should still work, maybe. Yeah, it does. I don't know why there's plain for maybe. But what's interesting is that if I were to do this, well, it does still have a missing dependency because it's seeing me use it here. If I had done this, then I have successfully tricked the ESLint plugin because it doesn't see me using it anywhere. So by having these things be in line to actually have a direct dependency about what you're using, the ESLint plugin can help you with that. Should we take things a little bit further? Make a custom hook for making a request against the Jiffy Api? Yes? Is that what I hear you say? Yes, you want a custom hook little mini lesson? Let's do it. We're gonna call here, we're gonna do a new thing called function use Jiffy. And then here, we're gonna pass in the query because all that this custom hook will take in is the, actually let me just go a little back because this is going to be a lot easier if I actually had this working when the asynchronous function was inline the useEffect hook. And you'll see why in a very quick second. Make sure that everything's still working. Work. Yes, things are still working. Oh, that's my story of my life right there. I have to work for money. We're going to make a new custom hook called use Jiffy. And all it's going to take in is a query. And then here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take all this out and put it into here. Yeah. So use Jiffy, and use Jiffy is going to return back results. And we're going to pass in here the query, which means that I'm going to actually yank this up into here. And then here we have set results, and then we're going to return results. Okay, let's save this. Let's test it. And it still works. So what I've done here is I have in here this use Jiffy, which is passing in this query. And whenever this query changes, then this results is going to change. So all this internally in here is the same. But effectively, all that side effect logic of having to manage how to call the API in here is managed entirely inside of here. So we have this use Jiffy, and I've literally just moved some code around. But now if I wanted to use the Jiffy API in multiple components, I can just use this one line. This is really the power of hooks. You have all these side effects that you can then just extract as self-contained units functionality and then use wherever you want. So again, all it's doing, I have a useEffect hook in here that's saying when the query changes, which is being passed into here, to then call this fetch data and then set the result internally into here, into this local use state of this use Jiffy custom hook. And then I'm always just returning the results. So by default, it's going to be an empty array. And when this effect runs and calls such data and then calls set results, it's going to then update set results here, return the results, which will be returned here, which will render here, and then get us nice and happy with our results. And because we have everything self-contained, it means that we could potentially show more functionality into this custom hook because it's nice and self-contained. Like for example, if I have a bad query, it's returning nothing, what I can actually do here is actually have like a loading state. So I can actually have here say loading, set loading. We're going to say use state is false. It's by default it's not loading. I'm going to have this return a object now of loading. It's the second argument. So here it's loading as well. So that's the value. I'm going to pretend that if it's loading, I'm going to say loading. I'm going to say give me gifs, or I will render the results like that. So here I have this set loading. So when we first make the call, we're going to say set loading is true, and then I'm actually going to call this in finally. Which actually means that this runs no matter what. So either it runs after the try statement finishes or the catch statement finishes. But I just want to make sure that I always set loading to false when things are done. So now I'm going to save this, and I say banana, give me gifs. You saw that for a second there? Yes? Give me gifs. And now I have states being contained inside this custom hook. And you can kind of build out from there. You can have error states, all these things. You can just really build out this really nice, rich custom hook. Okay, that was a pretty deep dive into how to write asynchronous React hooks with a nice, fun, real-world example. I'm always a fan of when you get real examples to actually show off why and how you'd want to use these React features in your everyday work. Remember, a useEffect cannot, the function passed to useEffect cannot be itself asynchronous. You kind of have to nest it inside of that. And after that, you're kind of off to the races. It also makes making a custom async React hook, that's 4 buzzwords, custom async React hook, for your own usage across your entire application. Hopefully that was something new that you hadn't already known. Please do share it with your friends, families, loved ones, and your coworkers are probably the ones that would most appreciate these videos. If you are not already a subscriber of this YouTube channel, do me a favor and yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button, smash that button. It's one of those things that is said in irony, but also in all earnestness, because every one of those subscription counts helps me spread my learnings and knowledge with everyone out there. You're also welcome to become a patron at patreon.com/hswolf to donate money to me making these videos. I look forward to seeing you again next week with a brand new video. And until then, have fun hooking.